take a series of questions and then he'll answer.
My name is Sridhar. I am from an alliance called Minds, Minerals and People. And, the issue that you mentioned about lack of benefits to local community. See, the government of India itself in its earlier draft agreed that there will be ownership of 26% for the local affected communities. Why was it that the empowered group of ministers diluted and disempowered the local communities by now saying it will be only profit sharing or a part of the royalty that will be rolled out to them? Because once again, the institutional form is again a
Can we move on to questions?
organization.
The point is taken. Question there? Yeah.
Sir, ma'am, I want to do a sentence. You've been getting a lot of macro questions here, so I think I'll go a little micro for you. What percentage of the funds allocated for the Serena development project have been spent? And then what is the completion percentage of the development projects that those funds went towards? Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
I am Girish Krishna, former officer of the Indian Audit and Account Service. My worry about rural development is primarily that as an auditor, where large amount of public expenditure takes place without any effective audit control. And the only solution which seems to be on site is what you have done in Narega, where the law itself has a full chapter on social audit, which means the citizens themselves who access the public record under RTI Act, they are able to audit and you take some action on the basis of those audit findings. Now, in terms of Saranda and the Naxalite hit areas, RTI, social audit, are these concepts of any use in greater involvement of the citizens in really seeing whether what is supposed to be done on the ground is getting done or not?
Thank you, sir. Ma'am.
Sir, you mentioned three things: security, development, and political mobilization. In your other interviews, you've also mentioned justice. However, in terms of Bijapur, I see a distinct effort, not by you, perhaps also by you, of a certain sort of trivialization and cover-up. How does that square with your...
Yeah. Short question. Prabha, make it very short. Question.
One person, one question.
Oh, this is about community rights, the tribal community rights of land. Your Congress Chief Minister Mukul Sarma was telling us the other day about how to build an airport. They very successfully and they managed to convince tribal heads and actually resettle entire villages to do that. So why is that when it comes to building airports or runways or things like that, you're able to successfully engage with tribal communities and their leaders in order to reinforce tribal community land rights, whereas in other places where you yourself have said just now that individual rights were, we've been,
Okay.
the point that you made about.
Priscilla from Bengaluru. I have a question. You said that one of the major issues in Saranda and similar areas is for land acquisition. R&R commitments not fulfilled, then multiple displacements, and then the propensity to acquire huge amounts of land far in excess of what is needed, and then keeping that land doing nothing. You have a new land acquisition bill in Parliament. How will that solve some of these problems, given that, number one, there's no, you still have the unutilized land is not going back to traditional owners, it's going into a state land bank. Isn't that then going to continue the issue of the state can continue to hold it for, as you said, 55 years? You have no retrospective application for those, so it's not going to solve the issues in Saranda or similar areas. And more than that, if I'm right, the Land Acquisition Mines Act will not come under the purview of this bill, is that right? In which case, will it help solve this at all?
I'll explain.
One last question. Here, there's one more question. After that, you can take. No, Piche.
Sir, I'm Ashok Kumar from One South Asia. Sir, I have two questions intertwined to one. One is, the menace of Naxalism has not developed overnight. So which arm of the government has been caught napping over the years? Because, and second is, who do you think should be held accountable for the kind of lapses? Because there is someone who is taking, like responsibility for the kind of government which we had over the years. So there should be someone who should be held accountable for the kind of lapses which we had in 200 districts.
Yeah, point taken. Can I, John? Sir.
John Elliott, journalist. You've got to live with the problem, I guess, of being accused of liberating the areas because of mining. Because it was the Prime Minister who first said, I think, that most Naxalite areas were important for mining. And Arundhati Roy picked that up with Glee and ran with it. Shouldn't you do some Narandas away from mining areas?
Sorry?
Shouldn't you do some Sarandas away from mining areas?
Surrenders
Oh,
from
away from
non-mining
yeah,
areas.
yeah. Okay.
No governance. No governance. There, no. Yes.
Yes, so you spoke about lack of political mobilization in these areas. There's this big, rotational reservation in panchayat elections. How does that work in the 65 or 32 districts? Do they have rotational reservation as well, which gives incentive for re-election?
So,
Okay. Yeah, all the normal stipulations of the Panchayati Raj legislation passed by the state government apply in these districts. So, people get elected for 5 years, reservation for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, women in many of these instances. Now, had PESA been implemented, there are certain special characteristics of PESA which would have enabled better governance and better administration in the tribal areas. In fact, a running theme of many of these questions is how do you improve governance and administration in the tribal areas? And I think that's a key question. The only state that has actually made a very conscious effort, a systematic effort to look at tribal administration distinctively from normal public administration is Andhra Pradesh. And that's why it's not a surprise that Andhra Pradesh is one state. Of course, Andhra Pradesh gave birth to Maoism in Srikakulam 65 years ago, but now it's relatively, it's in a better state. And one of the reasons is because of the model of administration and governance that they have formed in tribal areas, going back to the work of administrators like Mr. Shankaran and so on in the late 70s and early 80s. That unfortunately has not been replicated in other states. So I think to all of those who have asked this question on governance and administration, I would just say that the time has come for us to very seriously relook at the need for a distinctive approach to governance in tribal areas. Immediately following independence, I don't know whether you're from, you're an ex-IAS officer.
Yes.
So I can tell you, I don't know whether you know, that Jawaharlal Nehru, goaded by Verlier Elvin, who was his tribal affairs advisor, established the IFAS, the Indian Frontier Administrative Service. And some of the great names of the Indian Frontier Administrative Service, K.F. Rustamji, M.L. Kampani, all these people, the great names whom young IAS officers looked up to, belonged to the IFAS. And they were the ones responsible for governing our frontier areas. I think time has come for us to look at whether we can create a specialized developmental and administration cadre for the tribal areas. I think this is an issue that should engage our attention, because quite clearly the normal model of governance and administration is not going to work in the tribal areas. Because to give you a very simple example, Shailesh, if you do recruitment at a state level of teachers and doctors, you're not going to get people to go and serve in these districts. Because they get their deputation allowance, then they sit in Raipur and they have outsourced this activity in Dantewada or Basel to somebody else. So I have been arguing, for example, for local level recruitment of teachers, local level recruitment of officers, but that's not possible in the current scheme of things. Again, you take the whole issue of reservation. You raise this issue of reservation. Orissa has 23% reservation for scheduled tribes, but in Malkangiri, Malkangiri is 65% tribal. Now, should you have district level representation for district level officers, or should you have state level reservation for officers? So you end up having all non-tribal officers going to a tribal district and they don't stay there for more than 24 hours. You know it from your own experience. So I think the point I wish to make is that the time has come for us. 80 million people live in the tribal belt. It's the most forest-rich part of our country. It's the most mineral-rich part of our country. It's also the most developmentally deprived part of our country. A large part of it is because of the model of governance and administration that we have adopted. And I think it's time for us to relook at that. Now, issue on mining bill. You know, noble intention cannot be the sole objective of policy making. Noble intention has to be tempered by administrative realities. I'm entirely in agreement with you. Theoretically, 26% should be given to the local affected families. How do you ensure this 26%? How do you work it out administratively? And that is why, after a big debate, we decided that in the case of coal, you would give 26% post-tax into a district mineral fund, and in the case of all other minerals other than coal, an amount equal to royalty, and each of these 60-70 districts would get about 200 crores to be used for local area development in local communities. I can't disagree with you. Ideally, if you're acquiring land from 1,000 families for a coal mine, you make those 1,000 families, give them 26% equity stake in that coal mine. Or you give them the option of that 26% stake. But I think the chances of their being manipulated today, maybe 10 years from now, they will have the capability and the resources to be good bargainers of this 26% equity. But in today's day and age, I can assure you, if we were to do it, we would run into very serious problems of market manipulation. It would result in fact, people not getting what they actually want to get. So this via media that we have adopted, which is actually imposing a tax on coal and a tax on minerals, and collecting the revenue and actually using it through an institutional mechanism at the district level, in my view, is a starting point. And maybe 10 years from now, you will offer equity to the people whose lands are being acquired. Shoma, let me finish with this couple of questions. On the question about where is the money being spent, the developmental plan had 4 or 5 big components. First component was the building of 13 roads, access roads. 2 roads have already been built, 11 roads will get built over the next 1 year. So 13 roads would get built at a cost of about 100 crores or thereabouts, and they would get built in 1 year's time. 6,000 houses, money at the rate of 48,000 rupees per family has to be given to 6,000 families. They will build the house. We don't build the house. We give only the financial assistance. Out of the 6,000 families, 2,000 families have already got the first installment, and as I mentioned to you, the second installment will go as and when the house gets built, and the balance 4,000 people will also start getting their money. So that's well on track. The Rural Employment Guarantee Act works is a demand-driven program. People come, they demand work, they're given work, and they get paid within 15 days of the work having been completed. That process is actually now underway. That's an ongoing process. There are other interventions relating to watershed management, livelihood generation, on which the expenditures have now begun to take place. So the whole cost of this intervention was about 250 crores, spread over a 2-year period. And a lot of expenditure commitments have actually taken place. But it will take time for the full impact of these expenditures to actually roll themselves out on the ground in terms of project completion. Now, you're right, I did say somewhere that it's not a 3-pronged strategy, it's actually a 4-pronged strategy. It's political mobilization, it's developmental intervention, It is justice and dignity for the tribals, and it is security operations. You're absolutely right. But from that, don't jump to the conclusion that which you have jumped to, which is that, we are hiding something in what happened in Chhattisgarh. I think these are incredibly complex ground situations, and mistakes get made by security forces. Maoists use children as their shield. I have a PS who was not here today, who was the collector in Malkangiri, who was abducted by Maoists and kept prisoner for 10 days. And a 14-year-old girl and a 15-year-old boy were two of his 6 abductors. So don't give me the story that the Maoists are not indulging in recruiting children for terrorist activities. That's also a form of injustice. But I don't hear anybody talking about that. So there is, young lady, listen to me. The truth is incredibly complex. Don't demonize the security forces. Don't romanticize the Maoists. Security forces do make mistakes. Those mistakes must be brought out in a democracy. And if there are bona fide mistakes or there are mala fide mistakes. If there are bona fide mistakes, they have to be established. If they are deliberate, then they must be punished. I don't think there are any two views on that. But I think the outrage which liberals in our country have when instances like Bijapur happen is not matched by a similar outrage when the violence is perpetrated on institutions of the state, when policemen are killed, when teachers are killed, when administrators are abducted, when Mr. Alex Menon was abducted. So I'm with you and I have written to all the chief ministers of each state that please review all the cases of the tribals who are now incarcerated. And those against whom minor offences under the Indian Forest Act, for example, have filed cases, please withdraw these cases. And you will find that 75 or 80% of the people in jail will automatically get free. That is justice. Fulfilling your R&R commitments that you have made 30 years ago for tribal communities and not subjecting them to multiple displacement is a form of justice. So, the problem is that in the justice debate also, one side has its own notion of what constitutes justice. My view of justice is a little more balanced. It extends to both sides. Okay? Supplementaries later. Supplementaries later.
Yeah.
Let me address all the issues. Community forest rights. Meghalaya is a state where there are no individual forest rights. It's all community forest rights. In the nature of land ownership in the Northeast, the bulk of rights being recognized are community forest rights. And you know as well as I do that community institutions in the Northeast have traditionally enjoyed enormous powers. So I am not surprised that the Chief Minister of Meghalaya was able to go and persuade the community around where the airport was being built to part with their land for the airport being built. It's a different situation in central India. I mean, I don't think you can extrapolate from the success that we've had in Meghalaya. No, I have said that I've already told you that one of the weaknesses or one of the failures of the Forest Rights Act 2006 in the 6 years that it has been on the statute books has been the abysmally low level of community forest rights that have been acknowledged and granted. As opposed to level lakh individual forest rights, just about 3,000 when I last saw it, 3,000 or 3,500 community forest rights have actually been granted. This is a serious imbalance. And this needs to be looked into very, very urgently, and I know the Forest Minister, the Tribal Affairs Minister is very concerned about it. It's very difficult to go on a scapegoating expedition. I know it's a favorite pastime in our country, but we can spend all our time figuring out who was responsible, why did it happen. There are no dearth of people who don't do that. All I wish to say is that these areas, basic developmental activity to the extent that should have happened has not happened. It's not happened because of lack of resources. It's not happened because, as somebody said, very governance structure and administrative culture was very poor. It's not a coincidence that many of the districts happen to be poorly governed, happen to be in states that have traditionally been politically, not had political stability. Take Jharkhand, for example. They've had 6 chief ministers in the last 12 years. So there's a combination of factors. Frankly, I don't think it's very useful to get into a scapegoating expedition. The easiest animal to hunt in any expedition is a scapegoat. So we can find that scapegoat and then do what? So let's admit that we have had a problem and let's move on. Now John's point, why not do Saranda in non-mining areas? But the Saranda problem, John, is in mining areas. The liberated zone are all mining rich areas. So you have to face this issue very squarely and frontally. The bauxite rich areas are Maoist infected. The iron ore areas are Maoist infected. The coal rich areas are Maoist infected. And let me tell you, I'll give you a good example. There's one district in Jharkhand which was peaceful. Moment coal mining started, Maoism started. Pakur district. It's in the Santhal Parganas area. Now why did it happen? It did happen because the Maoists suddenly discovered millions of deprived Santhals. No, it's levy-based Maoism. Because they found this private company got a huge mining lease for mining coal, so they want a levy. They want 10%, 15%, 20%. I think the Maoists believe in the market economy much more than the government of India. They are basing it's purely today Maoism, the fuel of Maoism in India today is levy. It's not ideology. It's the levy, it's a moment you stop all developmental activity, Maoism will come to an automatic halt.
So if they are in Maruti, what do they want to levy there?
Sorry?
If they are in Maruti, what do they want to level there?
They'll go for a Bolero or a Pajero, no? I mean, everybody wants to upgrade their level of their living. So, seriously, I was faced with this issue 10 months ago. Should I invest 250 crores or not? Because in many of these areas, the more money you pump in, the more local rent seekers you generate, more local rent extractors you generate. But I don't think a government can take the view that we are not going to spend any money on development. That's not a tenable position for any government to take.
So why don't you take action against the companies?
No, one second. Let me finish all the questions and I'll come back to you. Now, on land acquisition, well, I don't want to say anything because the matter has to go to the cabinet now. So I'm going to take whatever amendment there is in our constitution to have silence. But I do want to say that insofar as the land acquisition retrospectively was concerned, there was a fear that we would be opening a Pandora's box. Okay? And my original position was retrospective. I have changed that view, and I have now taken the view that it should be prospective. I don't mind admitting that I have changed my view. Lord Keynes was once asked by his critics, saying, Lord Keynes, you've changed your mind. What explains this? So Keynes is supposed to have said, when I confront facts, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? So, in the case of retrospective acquisition, there was a problem. And we have changed the law, it's going to be prospective. no doubt about it. Had the economy been growing at 9% per year, maybe I would not have changed my mind. But current economic circumstances dictate the need for making the land acquisition legislation perceptibly more investor friendly than it has been perceived so far. And making it prospective was one very important change. There are other changes which you will see once I introduce the bill in Parliament, but this is the most important. I think I have covered most of the, sorry?
Social accounting, I think so.
Yeah, NREGA already has inbuilt the processes of social audit, transparency, RTI, but all these are in the, whatever we are doing is in the public domain. And we can't hide anything. I mean, these are all processes that are subject to all laws of transparency, whether it's